Hey there, what's going on? Justin here from Modern Mixing. Today I'm going to be reviewing the HoRNet SW34EQ. So this EQ is an analog model of an Otari Soundworkshop 34B series console, which is located in the main room at Virus Studios in Vienna, Italy. So this doesn't just model the EQ curve, but also the op-amp saturation characteristics as well as the hiss, and all of this can be turned off with just one click of the button. As you can see here, the analog button, that just turns off the analog features. The unit exhibits even harmonics for the most part, but once you start driving this input gain here, you get a lot of those nice sounding odd harmonics, and I will go into that with you just in a little bit. There's two sections to this, and I mean, they all work together, but I view them as two different sections, and you can see this has a little whiteboard around it. So this is sort of the EQ section, and then just to the left is the input-output section. So pretty self-explanatory. We got the input gain knob here, and then we also have the input LED meters. Then we also have the output knob and the output LED meters, and as well, like I discussed, the analog button. So once you turn that off, it just becomes just a regular EQ that's, obviously has the modeled EQ curves of this particular console EQ. But, I generally will have this on just because if you're like me, you want to add some color to your mixes for the most part. I think once you start experimenting with this plugin, you'll see that you actually, like what the color does to the sound of the tracks that you have. So for the EQ section here, we've got the low cut. And this starts at 40 hertz with an 18 decibel per octave slope. Then right after that, we have our high shelf, and that starts at 750, goes all the way up to 15K. Of course, our gain knob here, which is negative 15 dBs and positive 15 dBs to the right. Then our high mid frequency is 400 hertz all the way up to 8K. And again, negative 15 dBs all the way to the left, and positive 15 dBs all the way to the right. Our Q section here is a wide Q to the left and a really tight Q to the right, and then medium in between. Same thing for the low mids here, exact same Q. And then for the frequency range here, we got 150 hertz all the way up to 3K. Wrong knob with the black knob there to choose your frequencies. And then with the white knob, it's again negative 15 dB cut to the left and 15 dB boost to the right. And that's, obviously the maximum. And then for our low shelf here, starts at 35 hertz, goes all the way up to 700 hertz. And exactly the same thing, negative 15 dBs to the left and positive 15 dBs to the right. So this is our EQ on-off switch. With it clicked in, the EQ is on. And then with it clicked out, the EQ is off. That's pretty self-explanatory. But the interesting thing about this is even when this EQ is off, the low cut is still engaged. So you can still use this if you want. I mean, whether or not that's something you want to do or not, that's up to you. As far as this plugin, sort of how I use it, or at least how I've been generally using it, is for three functions. And I'm always exploring with this because I've been using it a lot more on my sessions lately. But with the input knob, I'll drive this thing like mad. Sometimes, depending on how much your input gain is coming in, you might have to drive a little bit harder, a little bit less. But if I'm really trying to get color from this plugin, I'll drive it into that plus 3 dBs into the red and then push it even beyond that. It just depends on the instrument. Like with acoustic instruments like pianos and guitars, sometimes it can add some distortion that you may not like. But with percussive instruments like drums, anything from a kick drum to a snare to whatever else, it adds a really nice color to it. Sometimes it can take a kick drum that's kind of, that's a little bit looser sounding, and it can kind of just tighten it up, and you don't even have to play with the transients or anything. Just drive this, and for whatever reason, it miraculously just makes it sound better. So that's a cool thing. I really use this input a lot, especially on drums. I've been using a lot, experimenting with it, and again, it's definitely aggressive. If you want aggressive, you'll get aggressive out of this. It sounds very musical too. Then for the EQ, generally I'm staying in this mid section here. So the high mids and the low mids, those are like my two favorite EQs. And I kind of call these things as like money in the bank. Like anytime I use these things, not on everything, but on a lot of different things, I feel like it works. It just works a lot, especially for cutting. So the workflow with this EQ, it reminds me a lot of like an SSL style EQ. you know, just I don't know, just the way it works in the workflow, it just feels akin to that. And if you're used to working with SSL style plugins, then you'll definitely get used to this one really quick. The only thing is with the Q, there's only 3 settings, so you kind of have to get used to that. But I find with like a tighter Q, that's where I do a lot of my cutting, and that's one way that I'll use it. So I'll kind of, you know, play around with those mid frequencies from like 200 to 1K, cut some stuff out that I don't like, and then maybe cut something out around 400 or going up. It just allows me to sort of experiment and cut things out that I'm not liking in that mid-range. And generally it does so in a very nice and pleasing way. Like I can cut out some mid-range, but it doesn't seem to thin it out. It tends to keep the body of the sound, but just makes it sound cleaner and clearer and just sounds more pleasing. So on the flip side of that, the third way that I would use this plugin is I would generally set like a wider Q and do some boosting. So, you know, for like pianos or guitars, anywhere from like, you know, say 2 to 5 dBs, boost up that mid-range, and you can really push this EQ hard, like sometimes adding 6, 7, 8 dBs, and it just sounds good. Like the more you boost, it's like the better it sounds. It doesn't seem to ruin the original sonic texture of the sound. It just makes it sound better. You know, if you want a cleaner sound, you can turn off the analog, but I find, again, that I like it on. I just like the color that it adds. And I'll do a combination of all 3 of those sometimes. Sometimes a little boost, a little bit of cut, and then drive the input. So it's up to you. My general thoughts on this plugin though, like from a positive perspective, I really love the harmonics. Like when you drive this thing, again, I literally fell in love with this plugin. As soon as I started hearing what it did, it was instantaneous. I didn't have to think about this. I didn't necessarily have to work with it for a long time to realize that the color that this plugin was adding was really, really nice. And in my opinion, you know, everyone hears things differently, but I actually think that the harmonics that this plugin adds is actually better than some of the more expensive plugins. You know, this plugin, I think it costs 17 euros, if I'm not mistaken. So like $25, $30 American. And like for plugins that cost 3-4 times the amount of this plugin, like hands down, I would rather use this coloration from this plugin than the other ones. That's not to say the other ones don't have uses, but I just can't say enough good about it. So the workflow, again, it has a SSL style workflow, so I'm really comfortable with that. I like it. It tends to work really well for me. So again, anybody else that's used to working with SSL stuff might appreciate that. It sounds really classy. Like the EQ curves, they just sound really, really good, especially this mid-range here. I don't know what it is, but it tends to just take a piano and just make it come to life, and it doesn't sound artificial, like you're doing something to the piano. And the last thing, like I already discussed, the mid-range, Money in the Bank. These are my favorite 2 knobs here. As far as the negatives, the first thing is that it's not AAX compatible, which kind of sucks. But if you are using the Blue Cat plugin like I am, you can just load up the VST version and you're good to go. So that's kind of one negative. It kind of sucks, but I understand why he's not doing that. But it would be nice to have that. Another thing is the GUI. It's not horrendous, but I just think it could look a little bit better. But again, that doesn't affect the sound, so it's not like a deal breaker for me at all. But it would be nice to have something a little bit nicer. And then other than that, like the high shelf and the low shelf filter, like those are 2 things that I feel they're good, but they're just not great. Whereas the mid-range here just sounds amazing to me. But the high shelf and the low shelf, I don't feel like they compare to the mid-range here. But that's just my opinion. Maybe I just haven't found a use for them yet. But there's other plugins, like other EQs that I'd rather go to for boosting like shelves in the high and the lows. But other than that, it's honestly like it's one of my favorite plugins at this point. I'm using it on pretty much every session, sometimes multiple instances. And yeah, so I guess I can demo some stuff for you just to show you what it sounds like on some drums and some piano. But what I really suggest you do is go download the demo, because, you know, there's no way to really hear what this plugin does until you start using it. And let's load up the plugin that I use. So these are some drums I did in a session, and you can see I drove the input knob like crazy. So it's really jamming into that red up there at +3. And I'm also, compensating for that a little bit because it does increase the output gain. And you can see with the EQ, I'm actually not doing anything. I didn't touch anything. It added a nice solid characteristic to it where it kind of tightened the drums up, but it also added a lot of mid-range presence and a little bit of excitement to the drums. And all it took was one turn of the knobs, and that's on my drum bus, as you can see here. So let's demo that before and after. Yeah, way more exciting, way more in your face. It just literally just brings the drums to life. And I'm the type of person that likes to use a lot of parallel compression, especially on the drums. And it was literally threw that plugin on, drove the input, sounded really good, and just moved on. I didn't even touch parallel compression on this track. So let's go on to another track that I used it on a piano, and I'll show you what I was doing on that. Okay, so you can see here that I'm really driving that input pretty aggressively. I'm trying to hit that +3 zone there. I want to get those odd harmonics into this piano. Just adds a really nice color, and it brings out that mid-range, makes it more present. Then I'm also going in and digging out some of the mid-range here. It's a little bit boomy, a little bit cloudy, I guess you could say, and I'm taking out anywhere from like 3 to 400. I'm using both of the mid-range bands. Just with the higher mids, I'm using more of a medium Q, and then with the lower mids, I'm using a tighter Q. So that's all I'm really doing, and you'll see like how much more life and presence the piano has. So let's check that out now. So yeah, you can see it's, again, I'm not doing a heck of a lot. I mean, of course, I'm driving those harmonics there to bring out some color in the piano, but just taking a little bit away, a dB here, a dB there, a couple of dBs, whatever, cleaning out some of that mid-range junk and just really trying to make that mid-range shine, because I didn't want to take away the fullness and the beefiness of the piano, but I wanted it to shine and come through the speakers. So this plugin did it in a very, very classy way. To me, it sounds really, really high quality. So again, like I said, I don't really think I need to convince you on this. I think if you download the demo and you try it for yourself, all you really need to do is throw it on one thing, and you're honestly going to fall in love with it like I did. Again, like I said, I'm starting to use it on all my sessions now. There doesn't come a time when I don't find a use for it. There's always a use for it somewhere. So it's worth every penny to me, and I think you'll find the same. So yeah, so that's it. So I'm Justin from Modern Mixing. I hope you enjoyed the review, and hope this improves your workflow in your life. All right, take care. Bye.
Make yourself just trust in me. See the best in me. If you haven't read the book, you've only seen the movie. More than recover first, try to get to know me.